Jason Blevins, Sixers Insider, 97.3 ESPN.com. Also the Painted Lines. Joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I felt like I feel a little bit more positive at the Sixers, despite how some of the fans are feeling potentially after some of the things Elton Brand said. I like the candor, I like the honesty, and I like the genuineness coming from a GM position that, frankly, you could argue the Sixers actually haven't had a legitimately good GM in 20 years.
I see a lot of positives in Elton as an executive for the long term. I think he's been in this position really for 2 years, and he's not that far removed from being a player. So there's obviously a lot of learning on the fly, and I think the most positive takeaway for today would be that he's actually going to be able to put his own stamp on the decision making. And I think he was part of a committee for his first 2 years. So right or wrong, the next year will determine his legacy, I think pretty strongly. But, as an executive, forget the basketball side of it, but just as a leader, there's a lot of positives around Elton Brand as a person. I think he's going to be fully in charge, which I think is necessary. I think the collaborative approach only works when there are very clear, very simple things, and basketball just moves too fast for that. Everybody knows what everybody else is doing. Everybody's playing counters, so. I think this is his sink or swim year.
Part of the sink or swim is going to be who they hire for the next head coach. Another positive I took from him, he says they're going to take their time. They're not going to rush into it. And I like that, Jason, because I don't want to see this team just go out and get a name. I want them to get the right guy for this team, the players, the organization, that guy to be part of Elton Brand's vision.
Right. Yeah, I think the only caveat to that would be, you've got a couple of roster decisions that you need to make, and you need input from a coaching staff on how they would utilize certain players. So I don't think it's a 2013 situation where you can afford to take 5 months looking for someone, but there's certainly no need to fill that vacancy over the next, even 2-3 weeks. I agree. I don't think they should be naming someone in the next 2 days. And if they do, that means they already knew who they were going to have before they fired Brett.
How much is the NBA's decision to push back the start of their offseason potentially impact what the Sixers are going to do?
I think it's really important for them to settle on a schedule for not just the Sixers, but any team that's sort of in flux. Because, setting that sort of training camp date, that draft date, well, maybe the draft is already set, but the free agency period, all of those kind of things are gonna drive how quickly you need to make other decisions. Like, how do you fill spots in the front office around Elton Brand? We're assuming that many of the holdovers from Brian Colangelo will leave. That's not a certainty, obviously. We're assuming that most of Brett's staff on the coaching side will leave. So knowing when the season starts, knowing when training camp starts, it sort of puts everybody on the clock as far as hiring the best people and how quickly you need to move. Because there's a balance between due diligence and, if Tyronn Lue, for example, is the best available coach and the best person to sort of shepherd your two superstars, then you don't want to sit around and wait and have Chicago or, name another team with a vacancy come in and scoop them up.
Right. New Orleans, Brooklyn, whoever else might fire their coach in the next few days. This whole thing is a very ebb and flow situation. But speaking of Ty Lue, is there a name among the rumored names out there, whether it's a Ty Lue or a Jay Wright or a there's a handful of Sixer fans who thinks Mark Jackson is the savior for some reason or whatever. Is there a guy of the names that you think fits the Sixers situation the best?
Well, I think if you look at Ty Lue's record with LeBron James, it's really good. And Ben Simmons is part of that clutch universe and has many of the same, just the advanced IQ for the game of basketball. And Ty Lue may be able to relate to someone like Ben really well. Outside of that, I think, I'm not sure I see why Jay Wright would want that job, to be honest. He's got the dream job right now, and he's got very little pressure, and he's got virtually no chance of being fired at Villanova. So why would he take that risk? It would be a pure ego move, and I'm not sure that you'd want a guy that was doing it just to prove himself. Maybe you do. I don't know. But then you have guys like Stan Van Gundy who have had real success with talented big men in the past. In Dwight Howard, Dwight Howard has never been the same, I think, since he left, since Stan Van Gundy was no longer his coach. And then Andre Drummond looks like barely a useful player. And early in his career, he looked really good with Stan. So, those are a couple of the options. And then you look at Dave Yeager, who had real success with Marc Gasol in Memphis. And Marc Gasol really is the player that Joel Embiid patterns himself after. I know we talk about him in relation to Hakeem and Shaq, but really, if you want to look at the first goal for Joel, it would be Marc Gasol, and Yeager had real success with him. So those would be the guys that would be on my initial sort of interview list. And all of them have flaws. Otherwise, they would, be coaching right now, still in the playoffs.
Really quick before we move on, because we only got a few minutes left in the show, I want to ask you about Yeager. Yeager is a guy that I think is a very interesting, great basketball mind, but the history of his poor relationships with the front offices, the rumors that Mark Jackson had a poor relationship with the Warriors front office. I feel like in many situations, the relationship between the head coach and Elton Brand is going to be utterly essential for the Sixers moving forward.
Yeah, but on the flip side of that, you had a guy that really catered too much to the players and their feelings. And you might need someone that comes in and kicks a chair and turns over throws a water bottle and shakes these guys up. Because there is a legitimate sort of observation around that their two stars were coddled a little bit by Brett Brown. So, I'm not saying it wouldn't go south and that Yeager would be a 10-year head coach, but I think, there might be some value just in having a cage rattling coach. But I think Ty Lue could also do that. There's some stories around how he stood up to LeBron. But I think that's going to be an important element to whoever you bring in.
Absolutely. He's Jason Blevins joining us here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at jblevins, NBA Sixers Insider, 97.3 ESPN.com. Also the Painted Lines. That leads me to my final question for you, Jay, because you mentioned about rattling. First of all, those who don't know about Ty Lue, what he did in Cleveland, go read Return of the King, because there's a lot of interesting insights in there that Windhorst and McMenamin wrote about Ty Lue's relationship with the players I think a lot of people don't know about. But you mentioned about rattling the cages. We've heard multiple times. Josh Richardson mentioned it. We heard Tim Legler last week on the Sports Bash mention it. Bobby Marks said it yesterday. Multiple media outlets. That word accountability, how important is it to change the accountability aspect when it comes to this team, not just with the superstars, but with the entire organization?
Yeah, I think it's huge. And going back to early on, we talked about sort of that collaborative front office. That's the problem with having, too many cooks in the kitchen. No one fully takes the blame for decisions. the blame. It's too easy to spread out, and therefore you don't have the same sort of pressure to get things right. So I think Josh Richardson talked about it most openly starting in January about sort of the communication issues, the lack of willingness for the locker room to step up and solve their own problems. And that I think that a top-down sort of heavy-handed coach may help them galvanize themselves if they're afraid of upsetting the coach.
He's Jason Blevins, covered the Sixers for years now, and knows all the ins and outs of the team. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at jblevinsnba. Sixers Insider, 97.3 ESPN.com, and the Painted Lines. And as all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Jason, I appreciate you making the time today, and we'll chat soon.
Hey, thanks. Talk soon.